Hi guys, my name is Zachariah Buerta and welcome to Flight Art Acting's first video for 2026. De Ijver bloeit de Kunst. Through diligence, art blooms. Alright, so we are an acting studio and we practice acting, we make videos about acting, we host rehearsals and acting training, and we also talk to other industry professionals about acting. But underneath all of this remains one core thing. We practice the contemporary form of acting and we are still rooted in our storytelling lineage. Now, you will be having two questions by me saying this. What is contemporary acting? And also, what is the storytelling lineage that you follow? Now, in this video, we will be exploring the origins of contemporary acting. Because the way that we explore and practice acting in the 21st century, the way that we rehearse, the way that we go to acting studios and acting schools and studying acting, and the way that we prepare our characters for film and television and theater, that didn't appear naturally. That developed over time in the 20th century, and that's what we're going to be exploring today, because at some point acting shifted from something instinctive and presentational and declamatory into something that is systematic and trainable and a repeatable craft. But before we start this, I would like you guys to like this video, click the subscribe button, and let's jump into it. It happens that in my posting of this video today, it will be the birthday of the father of contemporary acting, a Russian actor from a Moscow merchant family, Konstantin Stanislavski. And we have to go 100 years back and look a bit about and look at what the theater, which was the main platform, the main area where actors were performing in 100 years ago, what that looked like. Now, what's important to notice, and now my paper has fallen down, a theater in the 1800s, we're going a bit earlier than the 1900s, the 1800s, let's say the 1890s. Theater in the 1890s was first and foremost a social venue, a place where people would go to be seen. The audiences would arrive early and they would move through the foyers and the tea rooms. There used to be tea rooms in theaters back in the day. And the performances were just part of the larger social ritual. Because theater was a space where society would observe itself as much as it would observe the stage. And there was an artistic hierarchy in the theater. The theater was built around the star actor. It sounds very much like what you would think about old Hollywood from the 1920s and 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s. It's the same as what it was back then. And I'll quote here, the sun revolved, the sun around which all the rest revolved. And I'll quote here, the sun around which all the rest revolved. The reputation of the star of the play mattered more than the play itself. And also, acting was different 100 years ago because it followed established conventions. Back then, there were customary gestures, set poses, declamatory speech. If you go through the history books, it would be known as declamatory acting. And also, rehearsals were different than it was than it is today. It was more about being brief and practical. Rehearsals focused on the entrances and the exits and the timing of the play. Think about it this way, practical way. If you think about rehearsals in high school or start of university, it was more so about it's kind of like that. You just focus on seeing if the play works. Now, the backstage for actors were completely different. There were no green rooms. There were no proper heating in the backstage because the theaters as a social venue were designed for the audiences. So actors would go to these small cramped rooms and it would be cold. The doors in the backstage, the back area where everything would be loaded up, would be open and blowing in. It'd be very cold. It was quite a different era for actors. Actors, if they wanted to heat up, they would be hiding in the corridors and the passageways close to the auditorium where the audience would be seated, because that's where the warmth would be. And yeah, actors didn't train to become actors. It was a bit different back then. There was no systematic education or studio practice. Systematic education, if you think about university or you think about acting school, if you were to go to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, or if you were to go to the smaller studio spaces like the Actors Laboratory or the Actors Studio, it didn't exist back then. You would learn to act by observing and imitating other actors when you be absorbed into the ensemble or the ensemble or the company, the actors' company who would perform. And you would copy what successful performances were. So if this performance worked, then you would copy exactly what those actors did. It'd be even more beneficial if you were the understudy, because you just practice exactly what that actor did. The day that he would be sick, you'd be doing exactly what he or she does, because that's what works. So that's how it used to work. Repeat what worked. Now steps into the world a Russian actor from a wealthy Moscow merchant family, Konstantin Stanislavski, who in fact, on the day that I'm posting this exact video, 17 January, it would be his birthday. He was in theater not because of a profession, but because it was an active vocation in his family. Stanislavski grew up in an environment where acting as an art was taken very, very seriously. His grandmother was a French actress. Stanislavski was a French intellectual. And the stage was treated, and I quote, as something demanding respect and concentration and responsibility. His family organized amateur productions with a ceremonial devotion, and Stanislavski recalls that all of their spare time would be devoted to the theater. I'm reading here from my cheat sheet because this is a lot of information to go through, guys, so bear with me. Now, Stanislavski entered the theater through constant participation. He would direct himself and other people. He would organize the rehearsals, and he would keep notebooks about the various performances that he would observe and that he would partake in. And he would approach performances with a painful seriousness. This is a very Russian quote. He would approach performances with a painful seriousness. And he wrote in his early in his autobiography, My Life in Art, in his early acting here, is that the more Stanislavski acted, the more he acted, the greater became my perplexity, the greater became his perplexity. Because Stanislavski sensed that something was missing beneath the surface of a correct performance. This is a very common theme, a correct performance that comes up in the conversation of contemporary acting. Now, by the time Stanislavski reached adulthood, he had established himself in Moscow's theatrical circles as a disciplined and demanding actor, and he was known for his seriousness towards rehearsal and ensemble coordination. Very important to remember. Important. Rehearsal, ensemble coordination. Now, in his detailed diaries, Stanislavski would observe not only what succeeded outwardly with performances, but also what he had felt inwardly, what was truthful and what was false. And he would analyze the nature of his, as an actor, his creative state. That's also a very important thing to remember. Now, there were rare moments for Stanislavski where acting seemed to take care of itself. He would feel free and alert and responsive and alive. His attention was sharpened. His body obeyed without strain. He didn't have to squeeze. Maybe you guys have ever felt that sensation where you didn't have to squeeze when you were performing and there was no strain when you were performing. And that stage, there were moments where this stage felt like more of a place of living than a place where you would perform. And then without warning, this role would just collapse. So you would feel freedom, responsiveness, you would feel this state of being, and then without notice, it would just collapse without warning. It just disappears, and then you would go into effort and squeezing and into repetition. Now, the question that dominated Stanislavski's mind was no longer about did a performance succeed outwardly, but why did inner truth appear one night, and why did that inner truth disappear in the next night? Now, to find this answer, Stanislavski would observe other actors. Actors whose work seemed to bypass that effort, that squeeze, that effort and strain and repetition. Now, Stanislavski was very influenced by Mikhail Shchepkin. Mikhail Shchepkin was the most famous Russian actor from the 1800s. Gogol and Pushkin and many other Russian greats admired his style of acting and his observations on it, and this influenced Stanislavski. And Stanislavski was also inspired by the spirit of German ensemble acting. Remember what I said earlier about something about, what was it? About rehearsal and ensemble coordination, yes. Because the thing about the German ensemble company, like the Meiningen company, I don't know how to pronounce that company. It's on Wikipedia, by the way, some of this information. There was no single performer who dominated the performance, as opposed to traditional theater at the time, where you have the star actor, wherein all the other actresses' performances were to complement his or her performance. That's what it was about. German acting companies had a unified collective discipline a unified theatrical life. Now, the most influential encounter that Stanislavski had was watching the famous Italian actor Tommaso Salvini. Sounds very Russian. No, not Russian. Italian when I said Tommaso Salvini. I was in Rome for like a week, so I think my pronunciation is Tommaso Salvini. Tommaso Salvini had a way to perform without strain or squeezing for emotion. He didn't have to push or exaggerate, but he remained fully alive, and he appeared to have a creative state at command, at will. Again, the creative state. This comes a lot in the books of Stanislavski that he wrote. The inner creative state. That's what he talks about a lot. Now, this for Stanislavski was proof that what he would experience sporadically in his performances wasn't a mystery for the talented geniuses, but it was a specific inner condition, a state of being that creativeness on the stage demanded. Now the turning point for contemporary acting, the turning point for contemporary theater, because when we speak about Stanislavski, it's not just contemporary acting. We have to start with contemporary theater and the contemporary plays, and then the contemporary acting. But the contemporary theaters, the turning point for contemporary theater came when Stanislavski was asked to meet the very famous Moscow playwright, critic, director, Vladimir Nemerovich Danchenko. That's a mouthful. Vladimir Nemerovich Danchenko. A man with exceptional culture and theatrical knowledge. Nemerovich Danchenko had a reputation in Moscow which not only rested on performance but intellectual rigor and literary authority. Nemerovich Danchenko understood dramaturgy, he understood structure, he understood moral responsibility, repertory aka plays, the plays that perform in the theater, that's called repertory. He understood the theater inside and out. And he, just like Stanislavski, was deeply dissatisfied with theater. And Stanislavski and Nemerovich Danchenko had a very famous meeting at the Slaviansky Bazaar restaurant in Moscow, which went well into the night, and they were both disillusioned with theater. The star hierarchy, the shallow repertory, the rehearsal practices, and they both agreed that theater lost its seriousness of purpose. Theater needed a reform, a fundamental rethinking of how performances were created and what they existed for. Remember, we have to go to contemporary acting, we have to go to contemporary theater first. And in this night came a decision to what would be now known as the founding of the Moscow Art Theater. MAT. Well, MAT, if I were to abbreviate it right now correctly in this period of time. Moscow Art Theater, MAT. And this was a theater that was built on ensemble instead of hierarchy. So everybody was important in this theater, not just the one star. And every performer would serve the collective organism, because Stanislavski was very inspired by the German ensemble companies. Rehearsal would not be rushed, but rehearsal would be a central space for exploration and preparation. And repertory would be chosen by merit and artistic, ethical consideration. Very important to remember. Ethical and artistic consideration. The truth would be the theater's highest value. Now, the truthful expression of human life on stage, of human life on stage, and theater demands discipline and humility and devotion from its actors, and it would reject routine and imitation. This was the principles of the Moscow Art Theater. Now, from its very first productions, Ivan Alexander, Fyodor Dostoevsky plays and other plays, Moscow Art Theater set itself apart through its discipline, right? Because if you notice today in contemporary acting, we're very disciplined in our training of acting, because that's part of the thing of contemporary acting. And Stanislavsky writes in his autobiography that rehearsals were conducted with a seriousness unknown to the old theater, because it didn't used to be serious. It was about the star actor, but now it was completely different. Scenes were explored repeatedly. It was to uncover the logic and the rhythm and the inner connection. Actors were discouraged from relying on their acting tricks and habits, but they were encouraged to justify every action, every pause, every word. And costumes and sets also followed the same philosophy, and they were designed to serve the life of the play. You hear this: life, inner life, life. Those are key words that you ought to remember as an actor. Garments were worn till they were felt or lived in. External elements were chosen not for beauty but for truth, lived in inner life, truth. An environment where the actor could behave naturally. And there was a shift also in the acting styles. Performances moved away from the declamatory outward performances to a more meaningful, behavioral, restraint, listening, inner life style. How do I explain it, right? The meaning of acting emerged through the behavior, the restraint of the characters speaking, the characters listening to each other, and the inner life of the character. And the ensemble actors learned to exist together on stage. They responded genuinely to each other. They were there and they created a continuous inner life beneath the spoken text. Think about this. You got this heart here. Think about the subtext, right? Now, think about this as well. In the late 1800s, there was a genre of plays that emerged where the storyline of the characters and the sets where the characters performed were concerned with everyday life. And, of course, its social problems. This genre was known as realism. Realism. The genre of plays. And as repertory were chosen on artistic and ethical demands, remember Stanislavsky and Danchenko's rules about what they would consider to be performed at Moscow Art Theater, they chose plays that demanded this new kind of sensitivity. The first of these plays were Henrik Ibsen, but the play and playwright which Moscow Art Theater was famous for choosing, that also followed this new genre of plays, was Anton Chekhov. And the play that they performed, which redefined theater, was The Seagull, Chaika, if I'm going to say this in Russian, the play's name. Now, this play forced the actors to abandon their old habits, because this play required a new way of acting. I'm quoting here. A new way of listening and a new way of being on stage. And with this performances, the audiences encountered a new theater. There was no single actor who dominated in the star hierarchy. The ensemble breathed together. The truth was of the highest value. And indirectly, it solved the demands of these new types of plays, and the Moscow Art Theatre unknowingly, it laid the foundations for contemporary theatre, and also it popularized this new style of plays about people and their everyday problems. And from this came realism theatre, and realism theatre eventually developed into the film genre, and then it went to the naturalism genre, which is what we see today. Woo! Wow. And with it, the birth of contemporary acting. Now, we're already 26 minutes in, but we're not finished yet. With the success of this new type of theater and these new types of plays and this new type of acting, it created a new question to solve. How do you return to a state of continuous inner life and truth, night after night? Remember, the studios and the way that we learn how to act, this wasn't established yet. There was a ensemble, actor-to-actor intuition tradition that still passed on these values, that still existed. We didn't have this yet, but how did we pass this on to other actors? Now, Stanislavsky wrote in his autobiography that some evenings performances felt alive, and the next it was dead. And there were moments of inspiration that appeared effortlessly, and it just vanished without warning. He could not understand why on one night he was able to create, while on the other he would just feel empty and mechanical. The creative state, a condition of freedom and responsiveness and inner life, that was still unpredictable. And at the same time happened the Russian Revolution and also the Civil War. And the Moscow Art Theatre were losing their actors to exile, to illness, to poverty, to political upheaval. And the old model of relying on a stable company of actors could not survive. It could not. New actors had to be trained quickly. You could not depend on the passing down of intuition, of inner life from one actor to another. If acting in this art form were to survive, it had to be taught. Remember, it wasn't taught yet. And if inspiration could not be commanded, could the conditions for inspiration be prepared? And together with the teacher and great thinker Leopold Slozhetsky, Stanislavsky, they helped create a laboratory space where actors could live and work and rehearse and train together. A place where you could explore attention and imagination and physical action, inner life. And the inner life could be approached to lead to the creative state. You hear what I'm doing here? It's about the creative state that we try and achieve as actors. Stanislavsky identified it, and he wanted to be able to create the environment where we could approach the creative state, to do what we do when we're in front of the camera right now, as I'm speaking here, or in theater in front of the audience. Now, this was the foundation or the starting of the first studio of the Moscow Art Theatre, the first acting studio. And from this studio emerged the foundation of acting as a craft. So what I spoke previously about was acting as an art. This inner life, this creative state that we have, but now Stanislavsky created this studio and they developed the foundation of acting as a craft, like gymnastics, like athletics, where you could train and something repeatable. Now, this is where it gets very interesting. Now, as the system developed through these phases, you would get and am I in the right? Yeah, no, I'm a bit ahead. Okay, so this was an ever-evolving approach to acting. And this ever-evolving approach to getting to the inner creative state became known as the system. It is not a method. It is not a formula. It is a structured way to prepare the actor for creativity. The system isn't meant to replace inspiration. It is meant to create a condition in which inspiration could appear. It's very important to remember this. It is there to create a condition in which inspiration could appear. Now, because creating the conditions in which inspirations could appear, aka the work, that's when actors speak about I'm doing the work, they're just creating the conditions in which inspiration could appear so they can go into the inner creative state where they do the acting thing. It dealt with inner states that were difficult to describe. And this was a pre-modern psychological period of time. So Stanislavsky had to invent his own vocabulary to describe these inner states. He would also do diagrams and charts. He would also do these diagrams and charts to explain it. Some of them are a bit different than the other ones because it was an ever-evolving system. It wasn't a set formula. System is not a set formula. Please remember that. It's not the mathematical equation to getting to the inner creative state. It was always developing for Stanislavsky, okay? And it's always developing for us. Just remember that. He created these to explain his thinking, pre-psychoanalysis, pre-psychiatry, psychology. There's a very famous graph, if you go check Wikipedia, that maps the actor's journey towards the creative state. Now remember, there are things in this map that shows what you as an actor can consciously control. Attention, imagination, physical action, and circumstances. Stanislavsky developed the exercises and identified it with the things that we could do to what we can control in the consciousness to get to the creative state. And then, of course, there are things we cannot control. We cannot control the emotion. We cannot control the inspiration. We cannot control creative freedom. But the purpose of the system was to bridge these two things. All right? Stanislavsky's famous graph of the journey towards the creative state functions a lot like later psychological models. There's one that I can compare it with immediately, and that is Viktor Frankl's idea of stimuli and response. Now, Frankl maps how awareness creates a freedom of choice, and Stanislavsky maps how preparation creates a freedom of creativity, because that's what we're trying to do with Stanislavsky's system and his craft of acting, is to reach and prepare a freedom of creativity. But they both deal with the same problem. How do we move from automatic reaction to conscious, meaningful action? The conscious road leading to the subconscious. Now, there are other writers that you can explore. You can explore Jean Benedetti's modern translations of Stanislavsky's work. You can also explore the Russian historian, director of Moscow Art Theater of Anton Chekhov, Anatoly Smolyansky, his material. You can watch that to learn a bit more about it. But Stanislavsky's system is a proto-psychodramatic exploration of creativity. Whew, that's a lot. That's a mouthful. Now, for you Americans, for you Russians, and for you people that explored Stanislavsky's earlier stuff, the system developed, and it's still split into 3 pathways that aren't separate methods. Because when people speak about the system, everybody's got their own version of it. There's a beautiful history about it. Anatoly Smolyansky and Jean Benedetti is the best sources to, Donald and Declan, they're the best sources to learn a bit more about like the 3 pathways. But depending on the 3 periods in which Stanislavsky was, you would get 3 different pathways of the system. Remember, the road to creativity. It's not a method, it's not a formula, it's just a road to creativity. And they're interconnected. And the first is the earliest phase. This is before he started the first study of the Moscow Art Theater. This is when he started the Moscow Art Theater. The early phase was in the formative years of the Moscow Art Theater, the early phase of the system. You would have an emphasis on imagination and attention and communion or communication, depending on which translation you would read. The inner life or the life of the human spirit. That was Stanislavsky's focus point in that period of time. There was actors who encountered this stage experience the system not as analysis but as an alignment. One of the famous actors, less famous than the second phase of the 3 interconnected pathways, was the actor and also acting teacher Mikhail Chekhov, Anton Chekhov's nephew, who taught acting from the system that explored psychological gestures, very Freudian, like Freudian slips, where the behavior of the actor would tell something about what was going on psychologically about the actor. He would also explore the atmosphere, the creative imagination that was preserved, and the spiritual imaginative dimension. This was the more, the more experiential, imaginative, spiritual side of Stanislavsky. And you can compare it a lot, like when reading the Bible or reading any spiritual material, having intense experiences with it, reaching or helping you reach into a specific inner state. Remember, this is before psychoanalysis, so things like mindfulness or spirituality and those things were, which Stanislavsky, the words that he came up with, that was pre-psychoanalysis. So many of those topics you would find, or those experiences and descriptions of it, creative state, inspiration through imagination and imagery and the higher will of self, you would find in the first phase of Stanislavsky's work, of his system. Not a map, not a formula, but a system to get to the inner creative state. And the second part, which is the most popular with Leopold Silozhitsky, was the psychological phase. This was the part that was emerging with the first studio of the Moscow Art Theater. You would understand the intention and the inner logic of your character, the objectives, the inner circumstances, the inner justification, action. This part was to try and figure out why an actor behaves the way they do, and why the character behaves the way they do. You can compare this easily with psychoanalysis and Sigmund Freud's work. This went over via the students of the first studio of the Moscow Art Theater, Richard Boleslavsky and Maria Ospenskaya. When the war happened and things went to crap, they went over to America. They started the American Laboratory, and they taught the great American acting teachers, Sanford Meisner, Lee Strasberg, Stella Adler, Elia Kazan, Harold Clurman, and those guys went over to Hollywood, and they were also in Broadway, and they had acting studios, and they continued forth the second line, the second interconnected pathway of Stanislavsky's system. And that's, where method acting comes from. And the other two, Meister and Adler's work, comes from. But that is like where the second phase comes from. None the least known phase of this interconnected pathways was the psychophysical, the action-based pathway, the late period, where Stanislavsky moved away from analyzing emotion directly, and he moved towards purposeful action as a gateway to inner life. Emotion cannot be commanded. It must arise as a consequence of doing. Maria Knebel from Gittes. This is what the Russians practice, that moves away from the second phase, what the Americans practice. They've got, of course, a deeper grasp of it, because this was in the last year of Stanislavsky's life that he practiced. Let's see over here. Do I have any more things to say? What we must remember is that Stanislavsky's three interconnected pathways of his system was not techniques, but it was just directions, because the system was always moving towards the creative state. And this condition is a condition where you as the actor, you're free. The action is with purpose. The imagination is active. And you respond truthfully, without strain, without squeezing, without any of that crap. That is basically where contemporary acting and also contemporary theater and realism in storytelling was popularized. The search for inner life and truthful action and conditions that allows creativity to arise without force. And that's where contemporary acting comes from. In our next video, we'll be exploring a second part. We're going to be exploring flight art acting's storytelling lineage. We are from South Africa, and we're going to be exploring in our second video Charles-Étienne Boniface, the Frenchman who created some of South Africa's first plays with South African character types in a South African setting in the 1800s. And folks, if you want to practice getting into the inner creative state, why don't you guys go into the description and click the special link to join our open rehearsal sessions at Bloeit Acting. Bloeit Acting's open rehearsal sessions are low pressure, low cost environments where you as an actor aspiring or studying or professional or returning or amateur, you can come together to explore the art and craft of acting. You can pick up a monologue or a play that you want to do, and we just let your art bloom. Yeah, so if you want to join that, the open rehearsal sessions, click the link down below. And folks, thank you very much. That was fantastic. And I will see you in the next video. And remember, only through diligent practice of your art do you reach the inner creative state. And does your art bloom? Thank you guys very much. You guys were awesome. All right. Bye-bye.